On a misty morning in medieval Suffolk, two children walked out of a hollow in the earth, their skin the color of young leaves, their eyes wide with a language no one could name. Villagers took them in, baffled and frightened. One child did not live. The other shed her green hue, learned English, was baptized and given the name Agnes. For 900 years, that small, strange story has refused to be pinned down. It haunts manuscripts and museum displays. It becomes folktale and footnote, and it keeps asking the same unsettling question: who were the green children of Woolpit? Our earliest witnesses are not eyewitnesses in the modern sense, but two 12th century chroniclers who recorded versions of the event. William of Newburgh wrote as a learned observer, careful to place oddities within a moral and historical frame. Ralph of Coggeshall, a monk who listened for local color and rumor, preserved another telling. Both agree on the essentials: a brother and sister found near a wolf pit outside the village of Woolpit, dressed in odd garments, speaking an unfamiliar tongue, and green. Both agree the boy died and the girl adapted to English life. Beyond that, the stories diverge. Small differences in where the children were found, what they said, how they explained their origins, and those differences are important. They remind us that even medieval writers were retelling a tale that had already been spoken, shaped by memory, hospitable to embellishment. There is a kind of cinematic perfection to the image. Two green children stepping blinking into sunlight. It invites marvelous answers. Medieval belief was saturated with other worlds, subterranean courts, fairy rivers, lands of twilight, and one version of the story has the girl explaining they came from sin. Martin's Land, a place where two suns sometimes shine and everyone is green. That answer slots the episode into a long European pattern of liminal people, those who pass between worlds and return altered, those who belong neither here nor fully there. Fairyland explanations do more than satisfy curiosity. They let listeners keep their tidy map of the world while acknowledging a border where the map blurs. But the Green Children story also sits very much in the realm of ordinary human experience. Historians who favor natural explanations point to plausible threads: medical conditions, diet, language barriers, and migration. The medieval diagnosis called chlorosis, literally a greenness, is broadly equivalent to what we now call iron deficiency anemia. That condition can give the skin a sallow, sometimes greenish pallor, when combined with severe malnutrition. If the children had been living on a meager diet of greens or beans, or had been deprived of iron-rich foods, their complexions could have taken on an unusual cast. Modern observers, seeing that color for the first time, might describe it as green because it was the closest familiar word. Consider also the child's fear of fire and sunlight. That detail suggests unfamiliarity with domestic life or a history of trauma. Children separated from their families by conflict, shipwreck, or displacement are often terrified of ordinary things they have never learned to trust. In a coastal medieval world that saw periodic movement of people, and not just in the later Flemish migrations of the 16th century, it's not implausible that two lost children might speak a dialect or language unfamiliar to rural English speakers. A pair of frightened Flemish or Low German children, hungry and disoriented, could easily have been read as otherworldly. The landscape itself contributes small but telling details. The so-called wolf pit is a real feature of rural life, a hollow sometimes lined and sometimes open, used to trap wolves or as a refuse pit. It's grim, yes, but not supernatural. Someone falling into such a hollow might be found disheveled, dirty, and wearing clothes uncommon to the rescuers. Lighting in a pit is poor. A pallid, malnourished child pulled into daylight could look like a creature from another realm. We should also pay attention to how medieval chroniclers turned odd events into lessons. The girl who survives is baptized, named Agnes, and integrated into community life. That narrative arc, from stranger to Christian parishioner, reads like an allegory about conversion and assimilation. Medieval writers were often intent on showing how the church absorbs and redeems the strange. Naming the girl Agnes, a familiar Christian name, and recording her marriage and integration into village life tells us something about the values those chroniclers wanted to promote. Care for the vulnerable, the power of baptism, the ability of the social fabric to fold a stranger into itself. Color plays a symbolic role here as well. Green carries a bundle of meanings: youth, growth, fertility, but also sickness and foreignness. A green child is at once fertile with possibility and marked as liminal. Medieval audiences would have seen the color and read all those propositions at once, an in-between being neither wholly human in their view nor wholly monstrous. That ambiguity is what keeps the story alive. It resists easy classification and therefore stays interesting. The story's afterlife across centuries is revealing. In later retellings, the green children are sometimes tiny fairies or changelings, sometimes refugees, sometimes allegories. Popular culture has embraced them in numerous ways, in novels that imagine subterranean civilizations, in songs that make the greenness into a metaphor for otherness, in essays that probe the medical possibilities. Each retelling adapts the mystery to contemporary anxieties. At one moment, it's a cautionary tale about the unknown beyond the village. At another, it's a compassionate story about displacement and the human cost of migration. If you look at the particulars, the boy's death, the daughter's survival and marriage, the language barrier, the story becomes less of a riddle to be solved and more a prism that refracts social concerns of the time. The death of the brother registers the fragility of children in an age of limited medicine and uneven food. The girl's survival and baptism signal the community's capacity for nurture and for making outsiders into insiders. The chronicler's interest in the episode tells us how medieval society processed anomalies with curiosity, suspicion, and ultimately narrative. Archaeology and local geography don't give us definitive answers, but they offer texture. Pits, hollows, and the evidence of transient populations show how someone could end up in a rural village with no obvious backstory. Foodways of the period suggest how diet might influence appearance. Linguistics remind us that speech, which sounds like gibberish to one listener, can be a native tongue to another. Taken together, the natural explanations are not triumphalist denials of the marvelous. They are reminders that extraordinary reports often have ordinary roots. And yet the marvelous persists, because human beings need stories that sit between reassurance and wonder. The green children occupy a space where medicine and myth, greeting and fear, science and superstition meet. They embody a social moment, a community confronted by absolute otherness, and the choices it makes in response. Do you scorn and exclude? Do you fear and punish? Do you care and assimilate? The villagers of Woolpit, as our sources tell it, do a complicated mix of all three. They are baffled, they are frightened, and they welcome enough to baptize and name and marry. That mixture is often the real subject of these old tales. So which explanation is right? We can't say for certain. The sources are slim, the event is filtered through medieval priorities and imaginations, later retellings added gloss and color. But perhaps the story's stubborn hold on our attention is less about final answers, and more about what it reveals in between. How we react to the unfamiliar, how we tell stories to make sense of danger and difference, how symbolic color and practical conditions can coexist in a single narrative. If the green children intrigue you, there are direct texts and modern essays that unpack the medical, historical, and folkloric angles. Read William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall for the earliest versions. Follow up with modern historians who consider the social and medical context, and with folklorists who track the tale's afterlife. Each approach illuminates a different facet of the same mystery. Leave a note in the comments about which explanation feels most convincing to you. Do you think they were refugees, victims of a medical condition? Or the product of a storyteller's imagination? Share other local legends from your region. How do communities turn the strange into stories? If you enjoyed this deep dive into an enduring medieval mystery, like and subscribe for more investigations into the odd, the historical, and the uncanny. Check the description below for links to the medieval texts and to modern essays that dig deeper. Thanks for listening. Stay curious.